The winter wind slammed against the broken windows of the Reich Chancellery as if trying to tear the building down by force. It wasn't the kind of Berlin cold anyone could get used to. It was the kind that settled in the concrete, in the bones, in the troubled silence that hung over the city like a heavy curtain of smoke. Below the streets, in a reinforced bunker designed for war that had already slipped out of anyone's control, Adolf Hitler sat hunched over a map of Western Germany, tracing the dark blue line of Rhine with trembling fingers. The map was stained with coffee rings and the sweat of too many anxious hands, but it was the newest one left. Supplies were running low. Maps, men, ammunition, hope, everything was evaporating. Hitler had not slept in what felt like years. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flames, Dresden burning, Cologne flattened, the Ardennes offensive collapsing. And now, most intolerable of all, the Americans, the loud, confident, steel-rolling Americans, were grinding toward the Rhine faster than any German staff officer had predicted. They came with their endless supply trucks, their air support, their Sherman tanks hard as hammer blows. No one had expected them to move through the Rhineland with such determination. No one had expected their generals to ignore the winter mud, the blown bridges, the stubborn pockets of German resistance. And yet here they were, a thunderstorm of machinery crossing the western horizon. The bunker's air tasted of metal and sweat. Hitler sat motionless, listening for the footsteps he had already been told to expect. The steps of Heinz Guderian, his once trusted master of armored warfare, now returned with a report that Hitler suspected would ruin the last remnants of his illusions. Guderian entered without ceremony, brushing snow from the shoulders of his coat. He hadn't slept either, and the exhaustion around his eyes made him appear older than his 56 years. The other generals filtered in behind him, each carrying tension on their faces like badges of doom. Hitler did not bother to stand. "Well," he said sharply, not looking up. Guderian cleared his throat. "Mein Führer, the American Third Army has reached the west bank of the Rhine at multiple points. Their tanks were sighted near Remagen an hour ago. We believe." Hitler's head jerked upward. His eyes, bluish yet glassy, betrayed a flash of rage. "Belief," he snapped. "What is belief to me now, Guderian? I want facts. Facts." Guderian steadied himself. "The facts are unpleasant. The Americans have reached the Rhine with armor, dozens of tank units, artillery, engineers. They are preparing to cross." A long, hateful silence filled the bunker. The ticking of a wall clock became thunderous. Hitler rose slowly, leaning on the table, as if the weight of the war pressed down on his spine. "Impossible," he muttered. "The Rhine is the last barrier. The Americans were supposed to be delayed by our defenses, our fortifications, our brave young men. They cannot simply reach it." Albert Speer, standing calmly near the door, spoke in a measured tone. "Mein Führer, reality has outpaced our projections. The Allied supply lines are functioning flawlessly. Our positions are collapsing." Hitler clenched his jaw so hard that the muscle trembled. "Collapsing? No. Betrayed, sabotaged. Cowardice and incompetence are everywhere. If I had been properly obeyed, none of this." Guderian cut in firmly, something he rarely dared. "Mein Führer, with respect, no amount of obedience could have halted the American armor. Their production exceeds anything in history. We are defending with boys, old men, and Volkssturm militia armed with rifles from 1914. They are coming in overwhelming numbers." Hitler's eyes narrowed. "Numbers do not win wars. Willpower wins wars. Willpower, Guderian said tiredly, does not stop tanks. The words hung in the room like something sacrilegious, something dangerous. But no one corrected him. No one dared to agree aloud, either. The truth had become too obvious, too overwhelming to deny with propaganda. Hitler braced himself on the map table, staring at the Rhine as if the river had personally betrayed him. For years he had boasted that the river was Germany's shield, the eternal barrier to invasion, the line no enemy army could cross. It had been Napoleon's graveyard, the nightmare of older emperors, the sacred wall between Germany and the foreign invaders beyond. But now American engines growled only miles away from it, their treads churning through the mud like iron teeth. Finally, in a low voice, Hitler asked the question none of them wanted him to ask. What do the Americans say? Guderian exchanged looks with the other officers. Their commanders have issued statements declaring that the war is entering its final stage. They believe victory is certain. What else? Hitler demanded. One report said, Guderian hesitated, that General Patton himself vowed to drive straight through the Rhine and end this madness. Hitler scoffed. Patton, that arrogant cowboy. His entire army should have been annihilated in the Ardennes. Instead, my brilliant plan was sabotaged by incompetent execution. If my orders had been followed precisely, Mein Führer, Guderian interrupted, the Americans are not the same enemy we faced in the First World War. Their strength is strength, Hitler barked, slamming his fist on the table. They are not strong. They are pampered industrial workers who think machinery replaces courage. They do not have our spirit, our blood, our destiny. But even as he shouted, he could not hide the tremble in his hand. His furious words were losing their substance, becoming hollow echoes against a wall of reality he could no longer ignore. Another officer, General Krebs, stepped forward with his report sheets. The truth, Mein Führer, is that their mechanized divisions are advancing faster than anticipated. Our defenses are overstretched. Units retreat without orders. Panic is spreading. Hitler grabbed the sheets, scanned them, then flung them across the room. Lies, excuses, always excuses. Where is the fanaticism I demanded? Where is the loyalty? Where is the sacrifice? Guderian took a slow breath. Many have sacrificed, Mein Führer. They simply cannot stop what is coming. The walls felt like they were closing in. The bunker suddenly seemed smaller, tighter, like a cage built for a nightmare that was devouring itself. Hitler paced around the room, boots echoing in harsh snaps. When the Americans reach the Rhine, they will stop, he insisted. They will reconsider their losses. They will fear our counterattack. They will, Mein Führer. Guderian said gently, they have not feared a counterattack since the Ardennes, and they are not stopping. At that moment, as if to punctuate the truth, the bunker door swung open again. A young adjutant stepped in, saluted, and spoke in a strained voice. Mein Führer American tanks have been confirmed near the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. They are moving toward the river. Hitler froze. The words Remagen and Ludendorff Bridge rang in his head like a bell tolling for a funeral. That bridge was one of the last intact crossings over the Rhine. He had ordered it rigged with explosives. He had ordered it to be destroyed if the enemy drew near, and yet the Americans were closing in on it. His breathing became shallow, ragged. Who commands that area? He demanded. General Brach, Mein Führer. Then Brach will blow the bridge. Hitler roared. He will blow it now, immediately, if he fails. His voice shook. If he fails, he is a traitor. Reports say the charges were set. The adjutant replied, but it is unclear whether they are functioning. Functioning. Hitler exploded. Why would they not function? Krebs cleared his throat. The winter moisture, main Führer, and the lack of proper detonators, and Allied bombing runs damaged the wiring, and silence. Hitler barked, though his voice cracked on the word. He stared at the map again. The Rhine seemed to blur under his gaze. American tanks at Remagen. American infantry pressing through the woods. American artillery pounding every road leading eastward. The river he believed would protect him was becoming a doorway instead of a wall. A doorway for an enemy he refused to understand. He slumped into his chair, suddenly appearing decades older. So, he whispered, the Americans truly stand at the Rhine. Yes, mein Führer. Guderian said softly. They do. Hitler's hands trembled uncontrollably. For a moment he said nothing, just stared into the middle distance with an expression that flickered between fury and despair. And then he spoke, voice raw with disbelief. This cannot be. The Rhine is Germany's spine. It is the line of destiny. If the Americans have reached it, then the world I built is collapsing. No one responded. There was nothing left to say. Hitler continued, louder now, as if arguing with the invisible spirits of history. Do they think they can simply march into the heart of my Reich? Do they believe their machines make them invincible? Do they imagine they can force Germany to its knees? No, I will not allow it. They may reach the Rhine, but they will drown in it before crossing. I will unleash every man, every gun, every last measure of strength. Guderian shook his head almost imperceptibly. Mein Führer, he said, we have no strength left. The silence that followed was heavier than a bomb blast. But Hitler wasn't ready to surrender to truth. We will rebuild our lines. We will call up reserves. There are no reserves, Krebs said. Only wounded, civilians, and those too young or old to fight. Then arm them. Hitler snapped. With what? Krebs asked softly. We have no weapons left. Hitler slammed both hands on the table, knuckles white. Then find them. There must be weapons somewhere. I demand they be located. Scour the warehouses, the armories. Retrieve whatever remains. Already done. Guderian said. There is nothing left that can stop the Americans. A muscle in Hitler's cheek twitched. Then our last hope lies with the East. The Soviets advance slower. If we crush them... The Soviets are advancing faster than the Americans, Krebs whispered. They have reached the Oder River. Berlin is within range of their artillery. Hitler's face went pale. For years he had envisioned a different ending, a triumphant one, a world reshaped according to his own visions, a world where Germany dominated continents, a world where he was celebrated as a savior, not a fugitive cowering in a bunker beneath the ruins of his capital. But now reality towered over fantasy like a mountain crushing a fragile dream. What do the Americans say? Hitler muttered again about reaching the Rhine. Do they boast? Yes. Guderian admitted. They boast loudly and confidently. Hitler exhaled sharply, something between a laugh and a sob. Of course they boast. They have always been arrogant, a nation of businessmen playing soldiers, and yet he swallowed hard. They have beaten us. The admission shocked even him, but it was out now, echoing in the bunker like a confession to the gods. Guderian lowered his eyes. The Americans are not businessmen anymore, mein Führer. They are warriors now. Hitler reached for a glass of water, but his hand shook so violently that the water sloshed over the rim. He stared at the spilled drops, mesmerized, as though the water were pieces of Germany slipping through his grasp. He whispered, almost to himself, What do they want from me? What do they expect? They know I will never surrender. They know I would burn this entire nation before kneeling to them, perhaps. Speer said carefully, "They expect you to face the truth." Hitler glared at him with venom. "Truth? My truth is victory, always victory. I alone can shape destiny." Guderian spoke softly. "Destiny, mein Führer, has left us." The words were like a knife in the room. Hitler staggered back into his chair. "So this is how it ends," he murmured. "American tanks on the Rhine, Soviet artillery at the gates, allies from all sides, and my people. My people betrayed, misled, lost." But Guderian shook his head gently. "Your people are tired, mein Führer. They have given everything they had. They followed you into battles impossible to win. That is not betrayal. That is sacrifice." Hitler stared at him, mouth slightly open, as if struggling to comprehend compassion. "They have fought bravely," Guderian added, "but bravery cannot defeat reality." The lights flickered for a moment. The electricity in Berlin had become increasingly unreliable. Everyone looked up instinctively, half expecting the bombing to resume, but the bunker remained steady. Hitler rubbed his temples. "So what do the Americans want? To humiliate me? To parade me through their cities like a captured animal?" "No," Speer said. "The Americans want peace, a quick end. They want Germany to stop fighting." "Never," Hitler spat. "They want Germany to become a puppet, a slave to their industrial greed, or—" Speer countered, "They simply want their soldiers to stop dying." Hitler's eyes flashed with something like wounded pride. "War demands sacrifice. Enough sacrifice has been made," Speer replied quietly. Hitler looked around the room as if seeing ghosts. One by one, the faces of the generals blurred. Some had died. Some had defected. Some had been executed by his own orders when their loyalty fell under suspicion. And the ones still standing looked less like warriors and more like survivors of a tragedy too vast to comprehend. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery drifted through the ground. Berlin shook faintly, like a dying animal taking shallow breaths. Hitler inhaled sharply and said, "When American tanks reach the Rhine, they think I will break." Guderian said nothing. Speer said nothing. Krebs said nothing. The bunker was silent. Hitler leaned forward, gripping the map so tightly it tore beneath his fingers. His voice dropped to a whisper, trembling but defiant. "But I will not break." The tears in the paper widened. "I will not yield. I will not surrender. If the Americans believe they can force my hand by reaching the Rhine, they are mistaken. They may take the river, the cities, the ruins of my empire, but they will never take my loyalty to my vision." His breathing grew heavier, but then his voice softened, cracking under a weight he could no longer hide. "Even if that vision dies with me," no one answered. The truth in his final sentence was too stark, too chilling, too undeniable. Outside, the muffled ground tremors grew louder. American artillery, Soviet bombardment, no one could tell any more. The world above was collapsing into a single roar of encroaching doom. Hitler stared at the Rhine one last time, the dark blue line on a ruined map. The river that had protected Germany for centuries, the river he had trusted more than any general, the river now trembling under the advance of American steel. And in that moment, in a voice drained of every ounce of certainty he once possessed, Hitler finally said the words that those present would later swear were the closest he ever came to admitting. "Defeat allowed, so the Americans have reached the Rhine. Then it is over." But moments later, as if terrified of his own honesty, he straightened in his chair, lifted his chin, and hissed with fading fury, "No, not over. Not until Berlin falls. Not until the last bullet is fired. Not until I say it is over." Yet everyone in the room knew the truth. The American tanks were not just at the Rhine. They were at the doorstep of history, ready to write the chapter that would bury everything Hitler had built.